Hello and welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public class series, selections from Magick Without Tears. My name is Ruth and with me is Rex, my co-host for this class series. We are both academic track instructors with the Temple of the Silver Star. We are a nonprofit thelemic organization that's been around about 12 years. And we provide 2 tracks of training, academic, and that's sort of the side you're seeing right now, and initiatory training. Both tracks were designed to provide preparatory training in ceremonial magic, Raja Yoga, Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, and more. Using these foundational tools, we seek to guide the student towards a deeper apprehension of the true will, the law of Thelema, and his or her own psycho-spiritual constitution. So you can visit our website, TOTSS.org, just our acronym with a .org, to learn more about joining the academic track or becoming an initiate. All right, so tonight we'll be starting off this class discussing another chapter from Aleister Crowley's Magick Without Tears, chapter 17. It's about astral travel, or so the title says. I don't know how many of you got a chance to read it. You know, I was a little bit disappointed at like how little of it was about actually like the astral world and how much of it seemed to be about Kabbalah. So I just so you know, I put the chapter in the little chat box. If any of you want to look at it, you can. It's always helpful to have the text. We will be referencing it. So Rex, did you have any impressions other than like, you know?
You know, it's the same. I thought it was the same as, you know, my reaction was probably the same as yours. I was expecting more about astral travel. I thought what was good was there. I mean, he was all talking about, you know, a lot of good thelemic concepts. You know, the whole concept of, you know, without lust of result, I think that's a big topic of discussion, right? It's a big part of what, you know, it's a big part of what thelema is about. But yeah, it didn't really get into the astral part, although I thought the examples he gave at the end were really good. And so I'm looking forward to digging into those.
Yeah, it was interesting because you know, the first line is like, there is no better way of training the memory than the practice of holy Kabbalah. And I was like, this sounds so familiar. And then if you remember, I think it's like chapter 3 or 4 is about Kabbalah. And it's all about, you know, sort of walking outside your house and, you know, seeing, oh, my house is like the letter, the Hebrew letter bet, you know, and that means house. So, you know, like those associations, he already has like talked about this. So he kind of, I don't know how consciously he was like calling back to that other letter that he had written. It was chapter 4.
Yeah, I had to look a couple of times to make sure I was on the right chapter as I was reading it.
Yeah, me too. I was like, did we do this before? And you know, it's interesting because Kabbalah is like such a, yeah, Jason says he also did that. Yeah, Kabbalah is such a foundational thing. So, you know, the fact he's emphasizing it further, you know, really is like, okay, I need to know my Kabbalah. Oh shoot, I forgot to pull it out, but Rex, if you want to say something, hang on one, I gotta grab a book.
Okay.
777.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, that's, you know, if you're talking about Kabbalistic correspondences or really any correspondence at all, the 777 is a great compendium for those kinds of reference. You know, it's mainly a reference book if you haven't cracked it open at all. There's some good Crowley essays in there as well, but the meat of it is just that, tables and tables of correspondences.
It's so funny because
kinds.
I bought this when I was like a new Thelemite. I was like, I need 777. And then I read it. I was like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, people are like, I read 777. I'm like, cool. You know?
Better to have it and not need it, right? Than to need it and not have it, I guess.
It's said that it's essential. So it's just funny because I think, you know, it's hard to figure out what to do with it as a beginning baby magician. But then once you get into astral travel, this becomes sort of key to looking up what the hell you just saw and experienced, or so Crowley sort of postulates in this article. So that was kind of my impression, was like, oh yeah, that's why I bought that book. So, and I really love the way that he talks about Kabbalah as like this context for everything. It's it's the tree of life is his container system, joining up independent data, using the tree of life model to connect everything in the universe, so it becomes like a brain and nervous system. I think there's a lot we can say to training your mind like that.
Yeah.
There's like an ancient practice, the ancient Greeks sort of invented it because Google didn't exist, of memory palaces and mind maps. So, when he talks about kind of having this world where you walk around in and, see symbols within things, it's a really great way to train your memory to memorize like information. You place all these sensory contexts around information, and suddenly it becomes much easier. It doesn't tax your memory at all, lightens the burden, as he says.
I think this chapter illustrates that pretty well, in terms of the way a Kabbalist thinks, the way they experience their surroundings and the connections that you make all the time. If you're aware of those connections, the colors, sounds, smells, like your full five senses can be engaged in a Kabbalistic way. And so I thought, if nothing else, this chapter was a pretty good demonstration, a small demonstration of how that line of thinking goes.
Yeah, and also just, like it is a mind map, and then it also notes the importance of the TOTSS tarot deck, how he put all this information into these cards. And so when you look at one of these cards, it just evokes, all the Kabbalistic associations of, spears and letters and paths on the tree of life. So, it's one of those things where you're like, I should, knowing the TOTSS tarot deck will help you immensely in understanding Kabbalah and understanding like what he's talking about when he says, you travel to this world, what do you see? Obviously, if you see something from the TOTSS tarot deck, you have all of this information. Suddenly, someone in a chariot, oh, the chariot, So yeah, that was something that really just struck me. And then I was kind of looking through, he has another text that's really amazing. I think if you're into astral travel and trying to like understand what the astral world is, I'll put it in the text here, but it's something that's in book 4. It's called Notes from an Astral Atlas. And it's just like so rich in talking about what he means by the astral worlds, like so much more than this chapter. So I would say if you want more on astral travel, I think it's an appendix number 3 in book 4. It's called Notes for an Astral Travel, and it's on hermetic.com, and I'll put the link. And within this, he talks about Kabbalah essentially being like a universal language that allows you to communicate with other intelligences. He talks a lot in that text specifically too about how like someone could just fool themselves that they were talking to like something, like this cool like elf, and he's doing all my bidding, and then it's really just your imagination and you're fooling yourself. So he's like, use Kabbalah to speak to something and see what it gives you. And if it gives you, like an actual answer that makes sense in a Kabbalah, perhaps in a way that's like way more complicated than you can even understand in the moment, but you record it and then you go back and you check your 777, and it gives you like this consistent validity and reality to your experience.
Yeah, I think that's one area where 777 has come in useful for me in my practices, just in some of that, in some of the scrying that I've done, and in some of the other astral type of work that I've done, checking the Hebrew names or Hebrew words that come across sometimes. I think that was one example that he has in this chapter, where checking the values from that standpoint to see what the meanings are, extremely useful.
Well, it seems like, to me, it seems like the Astral to Crowley was like more of an interactive Kabbalah kind of laboratory, because even if you walk around in this world, on this plane with Kabbalah consciousness, there's a limit to your ability to communicate with others on those terms. because most people don't think that way. But if you're in the astral, you're all kind of like, you're relating the entities or the symbols that you're interacting with are made of that.
Yeah, Crowley is sort of saying like, if you can get something out of a praetor human intelligence, as he calls it, then you can analyze it kabbalistically and see if it checks out, you know, which is a really fascinating proposition. And then, you know, it's funny because we can talk more about sort of like his methods of gematria presented in this, but you know, just looking at the text, he sort of starts off with Kabbalah and then he goes to true will, which is strange. I was trying to figure out why he specifically goes to the line in the Book of the Law, true, you know, for pure will, unassuaged of purpose, delivered from lesser results, is in every way perfect. And he's like, you have to know what this is. And for practical purposes. And I was like, why did he do that? But looking at it further, you know, it's kind of like he's saying that pure will is like this form of energy. It's raw. It's like of its own volition almost, that like your human mind that lives on this plane like shouldn't even mess with.
Yeah, and it could be that he was just something that he was on his mind as he was writing that letter as well. You know, this is a correspondence between him and his student, so it may very well be that that was just something that came up either in, it seems out of context within this particular chapter, but it could have been something else that he was on about.
Yeah, I think too, you know, he might be talking about sort of the nature of astral work, and scrying is, you know, you're not engaging, you're not doing it because you're trying to like work a spell or gain something other than like just expanded consciousness and knowledge. And so I always think about Carl Jung said that looking at your dreams and looking at your unconscious was like gazing into nature, because it's something that isn't like really man-made. Dreams are a natural phenomenon. And so, you know, I think like the pure will that's inside of you, you know, perhaps to think of that as a natural phenomenon and how that goes into the astral world and what happens and presents itself in there. It's kind of the world of the mind is natural, and it isn't something you should try to manipulate. Like, I'm going to think about clouds and they're going to be purple, and you know, it's more like it emerges from a natural state. That was the connection that I made. I might be just reading too much into Crowley's words, but you know, and he talks about how he doesn't want to create a narrow path of work for his student. You know, he doesn't want you to try to feel like you need to have this experience just like mine, you know, to have your own personal experience of this astral world that you're visiting. And looking back to like notes for an astral atlas that he's written about astral work, he says, the magician must not accept the Master Therion's account of the astral plane, his Kabbalistic discoveries, his instructions in magic. They may be correct in the main for most men, yet they cannot be wholly true for any save him, even as no two artists can make identical pictures of the same subject. And I thought that was interesting, like, what, you know, referencing what he's saying here, like, I don't want to narrow your path. It's like whatever is in your mind is going to emerge, so don't rely too much on like what I've said about this astral world.
That kind of runs in theme with other things that he had written in other places too. You know, I don't think Crowley really wanted necessarily people to follow him all the time anyway. The idea was mainly, you know, this is what I've done. See if it works for you in a, you know, scientific way, you know, scientific illuminism type of way.
Yeah, I mean, he even says, you know, if you're a master of the temple and you've annihilated your ego, as we talked about in last week, he says most teachers consciously or unconsciously try to get others to follow in their step. I might as well dress you up in my cast-off clothing. So I feel like he's being pretty honest, and that he's really trying to just get people to like do the experiments And, he talks more about like his teaching methods. He's like, I can tell you what might happen. There might be obstacles in your path, real or imaginary, which you might place in your own path. And I think that's from a lived experience where he was like, oh, I was blocking myself this whole time. I removed the obstacle and now I can move on. So, I take that with like a sort of word to the wise. don't make obstacles for yourself.
Yeah. I like the line too, where he said, where was it? It was about the Great Dane and to the comparison to the dogs. Not merely different as a Great Dane differs from a Chihuahua, but as a buffalo differs from either. So he is saying like, go beyond. Don't just follow what I'm doing, but go way beyond.
Yeah. Also, he really talks about the like meeting other intelligences. So we have Kabbalah, we have True Will, and we have like an encounter with possibly the HGA. So we got all the hits happening in this essay. Let's see. And then, he, just like he goes back to like, I guess maybe explaining why we're doing this. He, in this text, he says, the definition of the great work in one way could be that it explains to us the whole object of manifestation, of departing from perfection of nothing towards the perfection of everything. And one may consider this advantage. It is quite impossible to go wrong. Every experience, whatever it may be its nature, is just a necessary bump. So that was interesting too. He kind of talks about how like whatever happens, and it's cool. To put it in my California surf girl accent. I think this is hella chill, Crowley, that you said that. But the principle that he's talking about, which is something that supposedly you gain after you cross the abyss, is equanimity. And, which is a reference of the chariot card in the TOTSS deck. And so once you become a master of the temple, your ego is gone, you are Nemo. You're just like, wow, I went through some crazy stuff. And maybe my house burnt down and everyone in my family died, but okay, that was the experience. And, that experience of not like worrying about it and feeling, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? It's really equanimity is the principle I think that he emphasizes within sort of like, this is my teaching style section. And he also like drops the I Ching to a little bit of like Crowley's favorite divination system, the I Ching. And he says, the third hexagram has departed from the original perfection. It takes all the rest of the hexagrams to put things right again. The result, it is true, it is superior. The perfection of the original has been enhanced and enriched by experience. That's a lot.
Yeah, I thought that was particularly telling, just in the way that Crowley views the I Ching and in the cycle. The way I've seen him lay it out before is, those first two hexagrams are the perfections. There's the three solids and the three broken lines, and so, and the three solids work their way through this whole cycle. It's like a cycle story for him, and it's a really good way of looking at that.
Yeah, and also it relates back to the Kabbalah, and that it's the path of return. It is that sort of the spiritual development of taking incarnation energy, Kether and energy taking incarnation into Malkuth, and then going through all these experiences and coming back home, to Kether after climbing the tree, but, being enriched by the experiences of life, So that was, just he states a lot here in this short chapter, which isn't necessarily related to the astral world, although maybe if you're scrying and going through sort of these astral levels that he believes exist, these planes of existence in each Sephiroth, maybe that is part of the path of return of consciousness and experience. So, maybe it's like, well, you might have a bad trip, but don't worry, it'll be over.
There's something really appealing to me too about that approach of kind of first you completely embed this symbolic system in your own mind, and then through the astral work you actually step into that, and then you actually your that idea of these systems of having an existence independent of the humans who conceive of them. That's the I Ching is like that too. Everybody who uses it gets freaked out by it at some point because it's like, whoa, it's like
It
you
works.
really feel it works, and it really. I mean, tarot is amazing too in a different way, but I Ching specifically seems like an actual consciousness, like a singular, independent consciousness that is talking directly to you.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about Crowley is he really believes in like preternatural intelligences speaking to you, and it's a jump, for a person who's like, I am a scientific illuminist, and then all of a sudden you're like, but there's things outside of humans that have consciousness that can speak to me, and I'm going to try to verify this via Kabbalah and astral travel. That's the experiment I think that he's presenting.
And it makes sense that they can be independent, have an independent reality, but also be different for everybody that encounters them, because that's how we go through this plane as well. We're all dealing with some sort of objective reality, but we all experience it differently, so that you can have both at the same time.
Right, exactly. And the way to use the Kabbalah, the way he's just demonstrating here in this chapter, is a useful way that anybody can use. And so it's a symbol set that we can all make use of to essentially test these entities that we encounter and to see if they're just fooling us or if it's a legit experience. It gives some validation to that experience.
Yeah, and because that kind of brings us to the second half of the chapter, maybe it's a third. It's these two really dense little paragraphs about, okay, you have a Bach piece that you want to use as your main weapon in invocation, which I thought was like an entertaining thing for him to choose. He's like, suppose you want to interpret a passage of Bach. So he says, as an invocation or an investigation of this piece, which is kind of funny. You assume your astral body and rise far above the terrestrial atmosphere while the music continues in the background. And so it's funny because he doesn't like really talk about how to do that.
Right. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of how to. I guess that was the thing I thought about this chapter, was it was going to have a lot more how to. Here's how you astral travel, or here's how you get out of your body, or something more practical that way. But what I found, especially in these last two paragraphs or this last section, was a really dense example of that experience and how you interpret it. It was more about not how you get there, but what to do when you get there.
Yeah, he's kind of like, hey, like you're in this environment, and then there's an opposing figure all of a sudden, and it's a chimera of a lion, a mountain goat, and a serpent. And so, you make an assumption it's a Greek encounter because it's a chimera. And then, you sort of like get scared of it and decide to make a god form, make yourself into a god form because you don't want to be eaten by this crazy lion chimera. And it's interesting because he talks about, it's fortunate you have practiced the daily assumption of such forms. And to me, I was like, oh, he's talking about Resh. So Resh is the ritual that Thelemites do, and Crowley students surely had to do this, was you face the four stations of the sun, like at different times of the day. And you basically like invoke, Ra in the east in the morning, Hathor in the south, at midday, Tum in the afternoon at sunset, and then at midnight, Kefra. And while you're like saying kind of a invocation, greeting them and honoring them, you assume their god form. So you do this 4 times a day for your whole magical career. And it's training. It trains you to be able to envision a god form around you. So it's, while you're doing these kind of practices that might not feel relevant, they're training for later, more advanced things such as astral travel. Rex, did you have anything to add to that?
Not particularly. I think, assuming a God form is a very astral activity. So it's something that, it, with practice, it becomes a lot easier. And so Crowley's assumption here, which I think he makes this assumption a lot, is that everyone is just as good as he is at everything. And so, but it's great that he's mentioning this. And I agree, it does totally tie into the practice of Rash.
Yeah, and then it's funny because he starts talking about Gematria, pretty hardcore. He's sort of like trying to figure out this person's name, sort of like, let's riddle me this. Sounds like at some form, David Lake is saying it might be good to practice corresponding God form for each planet. Sure. Yeah, the more you can exercise your imagination and your astral forms like that, the easier it'll be to assume them when you need to. But yeah, it's funny because he picks the name of the creature is Otilla in this little play that he's imagining in your astral world. And it's funny because I was like, what is Otilla? I couldn't really find that if it means anything, in the earthly plane. There's like a Saint Attila, I think, in Sweden, but that didn't seem very relevant. And he's like, so I tried it out in Greek. So in his head, or whatever in the astral world, maybe he sees it spelled out in Greek, the Ottilia. And he's like, no, that didn't make sense. And so he's like, oh, how about Hebrew? So like in his head, while he's astral traveling, he says to spell out the name Otilla, but in Hebrew. And I think he spells it out in there. And then he does Gematria, where he adds all of the numbers corresponding to those letters into 135. So you got to do math in your head.
Or carry your copy of 777 into the astral with you.
There you go.
Yeah.
Or astral calculator, I don't know. Whip out my astral iPhone. So, but this is how you do it. You basically figure out the Gematria, or maybe you just write it down later in your diary. You're like, well, he had this name and I'll figure that out later. But he's like, this is really key because you don't know if you can trust what you're encountering in the astral world. It's like, okay, your name's Otilla, why should I believe you? And you might be fooling yourself, like Crowley says in Atlas for yes. Connected to that, I saw that, yes, Sarah. But I think this is just sort of like Crowley, like making up something. I don't know how.
Yeah, I think
he experienced this.
I think it's he even says at the end, I think that it's kind of a fanciful example. I don't know that it's particularly meant to be an actual event, but I think it is a good illustration of this type of work that we can do on the astral. And I think it is important to test the entities that we encounter. And it's important to to make sure that, if you're doing a Mars working and you're seeing a lot of purple, you may not be hitting the mark. It's like there's those types of correspondences that it has to make a certain sense in a Kabbalistic way, or within the correspondences, the traditional correspondences that we know from 777.
Yeah, and it's funny because, and Crowley kind of says, okay, so I came up with this number, and it's basically, I realized that it's 3 multiplied by 45. And so now you're thinking like a Kabbalist who's really into Gematria. You think, oh, the number 3, that's Binah, that's Saturn. And then 45, I guess, is also a number of Saturn. He says it's the number of the numbers, some of the numbers in the magic square of Saturn. And so that's how a Kabbalist would think. It's not even about sometimes like the actual sound of the name or like those associations. He actually pulls it into like more of a world of like abstract pure math, which is annoying if you kind of like don't like math. But it's a very powerful divination tool. If you find a name and you can get a number out of it frequently, you just start pulling a lot of sort of synchronicities, in this world and also in the astral world. So Gematria, it's something that, it's not, I feel like it's a little, what's the word? Goes against people's instincts, and people are very creative with it too. But it's pretty fun to play around with, and also necessary apparently if you're going to follow the system of Crowley's astral world. So he puts a series of tests against the creature once he kind of figures out, oh, okay, it's spelling your name in Hebrew, gives me the results of Saturn. I like that. And he says to this creature, the word of law is thelema, to see if it, to get a response. But the word thelema is Greek, so that doesn't work. The creature is like, okay. So Crowley suggests giving a different question. What is the word of the law? And the creature replies, the word of the law is Thora. And he's kind of like, well, okay, like, can you spell that? And so whatever the creature spells, like Thora, he adds it up using the Gematria, so the value of these numbers each individually, and he gets 279, which makes Crowley happy because that's another number divisible by 3, so it's Saturnian, and 3 times 93 is 279. 93 is agape, and it is a very important number, to Thelemites. Is also the word thelema is also 93, and also I think Iwas, who is Crowley's holy guardian angel, is 93. So then number 93 is like, oh, okay, you don't speak Greek, but you speak Gematria. Anything to add to that, Rex?
Not really. I think that it's just another example of how these correspondences can prove out, and this is a pretty good convoluted one too. But it comes back so that it's a validation of this encounter, and it's a pretty good example of that. I think for myself, I would be, I'm not sure I would be able to do all that math in my head, but not without some practice anyway. But I think the results there are, you want to make sure you're talking to who they say they are, and not waste time with anyone who's just wasting your time.
And one thing you can do if you're like doing an astral travel or scrying is, put your iPhone on record and record your voice and just say what you're seeing out loud. And then you can go back to it and, write out the letters and do the math later and kind of verify like what you saw was, valid. And then maybe you can go revisit that creature if they're valid and have another conversation with them. So, you can use like those methods. It doesn't have to be in the moment. I doubt Crowley in the moment knew a lot of this stuff too. I think it's something that requires sort of testing and coming back. So, that's the adventure of the astral plane for Crowley. And it reminded me, I went to Dr. Shoemaker's Living Thelema and just like, okay, there's a whole chapter on sort of astral travel, and seeing that it comes in at the stage of the neophyte in the AA. So it's a really important thing if it's in the stage of neophyte, because that's like one of the first grades. And he talks about like being able to build the body of light and do astral projection is like just one of the most important skills, because you start to speak in the language of symbol, which he says is the natural language of the astral world. And that's important because when you want to start talking to preternatural intelligences, such as your holy guardian angel, you're going to have to learn how to understand symbols and work with symbols and interpret them in a way that, will help you find your holy guardian angel.
I thought of one thing to say about Gematria that I don't know how many people on this call have had a lot of experience with it. I feel like it's one of those, it's not an exact science. It's one of those things where, and we've seen this in some of Crowley's Gematria, where if it doesn't quite fit, it feels to me like he's kind of changing the rules sometimes to make it fit. So Gematria has always, I think it's interesting, and I think some of the results there are spot on sometimes, and they can really lead to insights. But it's good to approach it with a grain of salt. But certainly, if the Greek doesn't work, try Hebrew. If those don't work, try the Latin simplex or some other method, and just see if any of those lead to some meaningful connections, because that's what it's about, is the connections
Yeah, it's kind of a divination tool, you know. So like any divination tool, how accurate can it be? You know, it's only useful and accurate if it brings you to the place you need to be. You know, if you rely on it too heavily, it's like you kind of become a crazy person. I know my own adventures in Gematria. It's like, okay, I'm going to put this down for a while because everything is adding up to 777. So, and you know, there's some really great stuff that Crowley talks about in the Astral Atlas chapter of Magick that I would really encourage you, you know, if you want to learn more about like actual astral work. And also there's a Denning and Phillips book, The Practical Guide to Astral Projection, that is a little bit more of, you know, like physical practicalities. I'll just put that there in the chat window. But that's one we always recommend as something to, you know, if you want to like learn how Melita Dennings and Phillips would kind of the posture you would sit and how you would like relax your breathing and, you know, what, you know, sort of things to look for to validate sort of having an astral experience. That's a really good book. And then, the notes on an astral atlas. The thing that I found reading that too was cool because he was like, Magick is building a pyramid built layer by layer. The work of the body of light, astral travel, which is with the technique of yoga, is the foundation of the whole. One's apprehension of the astral plane must be accurate, for angels, archangels, and gods are derived therefrom by analysis. One must have the pure materials of Kabbalah if one wishes to brew pure beer. So he's like, you know, the Kabbalah is the foundation of your magical pyramid. And if you want to talk to these angels and gods, you better have a good foundation, was the lesson that I got from that.
Nice.
Which is why he keeps talking about Kabbalah instead of your astral double and all those fun things, I think. Cool, so we can open it up to questions. I'll also put the Crowley's notes for the Astral Atlas, which is also on hermetic.com if you guys want to reference that. You know, and then obviously Living Thelema, Dr. Shoemaker's book, chapter 11, if you have that handy, talks about, you know, astral travel, some practical, some theoretical stuff. Anyone astral travel recently?
I think an assumption people have when they hear something like astral is that it's of another dimension other than our own, or that divination tools are just kind of these games that we play of chance or fate, and they don't realize the deep philosophy and politics that underlie these things. With the I Ching as one example, you know, we're not just throwing around coins and yarrow sticks and creating the hexagrams in relation to something like Gematria type of divination and this other level of language to communicate, but we're going through integral processes, we're bridging the divide of, you know, the feminine and masculine principles, and the goal is to raise the entire culture. It's not just the will or the individual self that we're trying to elevate and bring to an entirely new place, although there are heavens and other spheres involved. The point is to raise the fallenness of civilization, of the self, of the earth here, right now. And these astral planes and subtle bodies and etheric realms, and I think Rudolf Steiner does the best job at explaining all of these and how important it is to focus on them within our lived reality, and not to kind of dissociate them as other places that we need to escape to and practice. And I think that's where the real magic and ritual takes place, is when we start to see that these are realms and there are entities that exist within these realms that are actually part of our lived reality right here.
Sure.
And we can integrate those. And of course, you know, that's Jung and others too Jung a lot more skeptical about it. But and then we can use things like divination tools or Gematria to communicate with these other dimensions that weave themselves in between the physical plane.
Sure. I love that Crowley kind of, references Kabbalah as a shared language. That was kind of an exciting insight to be like, well, why am I learning all this stuff? But, he was positing that, well, you can talk to other entities if you're using kind of these, they would be considered like pure mathematics and stuff like that, the plane of information, as a Luth. They're archetypes that you're actually interacting with. And I believe Christian earlier was saying something about, are the memory palaces, these different sort of like the collective unconsciousness, like going back to Jung and accessible by everyone. If you were making a memory palace, that's something that you're doing. So it's a very conscious, intentional thing. It's not the unconscious. But in the notes on the Astral Atlas, Crowley talks about, the other planes that you can visit, and some of them are Egyptian, some of them are Celtic. They have their own like symbol set that you can go visit. And that is more like the collective unconsciousness. And I think Jung would say that if we are working on ourselves because we are connected to all, then we are changing the collective consciousness by changing ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I think that ties into what Kristen posted here in the chat. Wouldn't the first step be to raise the collective? The first step to raise the collective would be to raise the individual. For instance, caring for the tree rather than for the forest, or as a beginning. And I think that ties into what you were saying there, because I think we, the work that we do, it is on ourselves, but that echoes outward from us into other realms, it affects other people around us. So I think we're all saying the same thing there.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we're almost at 45 minutes. I kind of like to keep these like shorter than an hour, just so people can eat dinner and have their evenings. But anyone else want to contribute at all? Like anything from, the astral journey world or Kabbalah, foundational magic? We're all ready to have a nice winter holiday.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for showing up. Great discussion. Awesome. Very cool that we can kind of extract some meaning and I guess relevance out of this work. So thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And join us next time. We didn't pick a chapter for next time.
We didn't. We'll probably have to send that out.
Well, I was thinking improvising a temple might be cool.
Sure, let's do that.
I mean, since we're all sort of stuck at home and maybe some of us have to do that. I think it's chapter 23. So I'll comment on it. And if anybody wants me to email them beforehand with the chapter, I'm doing that to someone, you can email me. I'll put my email here. There you go. Thank you. Cool. And just feel free to email me if you want to be added to that list. And thanks for joining us, everyone.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.